Hey everyone. Today, I'm going to introduce you to an incredibly thrilling disaster movie. Produced by Netflix in 2024. A tourist island faces a volcanic eruption. Volcanic ash fills the sky, blocking the sunlight. What's worse is that a strong earthquake triggers a giant tsunami. How will the tourists on the island cope with this extreme challenge? Let's watch the movie together. A few tourists are having fun on a cruise ship. Suddenly, bubbles start rising from the sea. The woman panics when she realizes her friend just jumped into the sea. And there's no response. Soon after, the sea boils like hot water. And bubbles appear everywhere. These tourists try to escape, but it's already too late. The scene changes. Frederick's family is on vacation on Palma Island. It's a popular tourist spot in Norway. Every year, many tourists visit to admire the beautiful coastline. Frederick's family can't stop praising it. But little do they know, an unprecedented disaster is about to strike. In the deep ravine of the island, geologist Marie and her colleague are walking through thick fog. Turns out there's an active volcano in the center of the island. Although it's been dormant for decades, the activity inside hasn't stopped. Marie visits here every 2 weeks to check it out. But this time, something feels different. Water starts leaking from the cliff unexpectedly. Marie collects some samples to bring back for testing. Then, she notices many bat carcasses on the ground. Her colleague checks it out, and discovers that the carbon dioxide levels here have exceeded the safe limit. When he shines a light on the cave ceiling, he sees a crack in the ceiling, which wasn't there before. At the La Palma Geological Research Institute, Director Alvaro sees some news. There's been a shipwreck in the southeast of the island. 7 tourists on the ship didn't make it. Just when he starts to worry, Marie and her colleague bring in their findings from the volcanic area. There are many signs that the island's volcanoes are waking up. She suggests they quickly warn the locals and prepare for emergency situations. The director also feels worried after reviewing the data, but he has his own thoughts. The island's volcanoes have been active every day, and that crack didn't form overnight. If they only go by these things to send out signals, for sure, it would cause panic among the islanders. Don't forget that it's the peak tourist season right now. After careful consideration, the director decides to have Marie install monitoring equipment first, to keep track of the volcano's activity at all times. However, her colleague has another concern. There's a crack several kilometers long near the volcano by the sea. If it erupts again, it could cause half the mountain slope to slide into the sea, which could very likely trigger a massive tsunami. Marie feels scared inside. Shouldn't we immediately warn the people on the island to evacuate? But to her surprise, Hauker sighs and says, the director has his reasons for not rushing into action. Because a few years ago, he caused an incident. Back then, a geologist had also discovered signs of volcanic activity. The director immediately ordered an emergency evacuation. But in the end, the islanders waited for weeks, only for the volcano to show no signs of activity. They're still blaming the director to this day, because it cost them a lot of tourism income for that summer. Frederick's family is enjoying the view by the beach. They don't know that the crisis is slowly getting closer, until they realize their youngest son has mysteriously disappeared. The whole family quickly stops their leisure activities, and frantically searches everywhere. Eventually, they find him, standing on a rock, looking out to sea. He's just standing there, staring blankly, with his eyes fixed on the ocean. A group of sea turtles is swimming towards the open sea. This is their habitat, you know. What could have made them abandon their nests? Meanwhile, Marie has finished analyzing the water sample from the volcano cave, and discovered there were no minerals in it, meaning the water wasn't from the ground, but came from condensation due to the temperature change inside the cave. To gather more data, she and Hauker rush back to the volcanic area, crossing the road covered with volcanic ash. They prepare to install some equipment at the mouth of the volcano. However, as they reach halfway up the slope, they discover a new crack in the mountain range. Although it seems small, they don't know if it will continue to grow. Just as they're setting up the monitoring equipment, the geological team spots something alarming. The temperature inside the mountain is rising rapidly. The director quickly calls Marie, telling her and Hauker to retreat immediately. However, before the call ended, a large amount of white smoke started rising from the cracks. The two quickly grabbed their backpacks and ran. But unexpectedly, they ran into some tourists on the way. Marie had to stop and tell them to leave quickly. This delay caused them to be a bit late in escaping. The smoke inside the mountain grew thicker and thicker. Marie covered her nose and ran ahead quickly. In her panic, she accidentally rolled down the slope. She woke up after a brief unconsciousness, and found herself lying in a hospital bed. Marie anxiously looked out the window, and noticed that everything outside was calm. The director was sitting on a bench in the hallway, and he was relieved that there had been no volcanic eruption yesterday. And the white smoke was just the volcano releasing pressure. The pressure inside the mountain was much lower than the warning level now. So, he didn't issue an emergency evacuation notice. But Marie, as a geologist, clearly knew that when a volcano releases pressure, it means that the eruption is imminent. However, the director, being cautious, rejected Marie's suggestion. He was very worried about another blunder happening. Both sides couldn't convince each other. So, the two had no choice but to go to the town hall, to report the issue to the mayor's secretary. But the mayor's stance was the same as the director's. You can't rely on guesswork to make the islanders and tourists panic. In the end, the director came up with a middle ground solution. Marie would constantly monitor the volcano and report all data. How to proceed would be decided by higher-ups. But Marie felt that this would take too much time, and the volcano on the island could erupt at any moment. The first thing she thought of was her younger brother. She had repeatedly reminded him to book the nearest flight to leave the island. When Marie returned to the monitoring center again, she found that the pressure inside the volcano was rising rapidly, and the surrounding rocks were shaking violently. She realized that the volcano was about to erupt. The director felt anxious. He ordered his assistant to immediately notify the city government to issue an evacuation order. But now, it seemed a little too late. A passenger plane was preparing to take off on the runway, when suddenly, a large amount of smoke and ash erupted from the volcano. When the captain received the cancellation notice, the plane had already left the runway and ascended into the sky. Seeing that the volcanic ash was getting closer, the captain could only pull the plane into a sharp turn. But unfortunately, they couldn't avoid it. The dense smoke was rapidly expanding. Frederick's family was still eating fruit at the hotel, when they suddenly saw a passenger plane fly over their heads with a long tail of fire. Then it fell straight to the ground. All the tourists were terrified, including the mayor's secretary, who realized a disaster was about to happen. The mayor contacted the director of geology directly, to inform him that the expert team had analyzed the data in detail. The volcanic eruption would subside in a few hours. So, they rejected the director's emergency evacuation request, and he was almost speechless. Didn't anyone notice the cracks on the volcano? If a landslide happens, it could trigger a massive tsunami. But this warning was deliberately ignored by the mayor, because there were still thousands of tourists on the island. The losses caused by an emergency evacuation were something no one could bear. The director, after hearing this, didn't know what to do anymore. So, he ordered his subordinates to quickly take his family off the island, and he would stay behind to continue monitoring the volcano data. Marie didn't refuse and went back home. But she found out that her brother, after causing a ruckus due to drinking, had been arrested by the police. She told the police about the volcanic eruption disaster, but the police hadn't received the evacuation notice. Instead, they accused Marie of spreading rumors and arrested her. What surprised everyone was that the truth was exactly what the expert team had predicted. The volcano really stopped erupting after a few hours. Tourists continued to enjoy their holiday peacefully. Luckily, Frederick's brother-in-law worked at the emergency command office. Knowing that all flights to La Palma were cancelled, he quickly realized something big was about to happen there. So, he secretly called Frederick's wife to remind her to leave the island quickly by boat. Frederick trusted his brother-in-law a lot. So, he immediately returned to the hotel to pack his bags. But when he was about to call a taxi to the port, unfortunately, there were too few taxis available. At that moment, Frederick saw a truck parked by the side of the road with its engine still running, and the driver was unloading goods at a distance. He told his family to get in the truck quickly, and stepped on the gas to drive fast to the port. About 10 minutes later, Frederick's family finally arrived. They saw a boat preparing to depart from a distance. As they were about to get off the truck, unexpectedly, the truck owner chased after them. Frederick told his family to quickly get on the boat, while he stayed behind to deal with the driver. He was beaten badly and had to compensate a large amount of money. Frederick rushed to the port, only to find that the boat had already left. Frederick could only stand and watch as his family sailed away. But he didn't give up. He was preparing to rent a boat to chase after his family. But at that moment, an emergency alarm sounded in the air. It turned out that the director had discovered that the pressure inside the volcano was increasing again. This time, he didn't ask the mayor's opinion, but directly issued an evacuation warning. Frederick urged the staff. But unfortunately, the staff had already received a notice from the company that all business operations would be halted. Luckily, he met a kind local on the island, and there was still one available spot on their yacht. But just as he boarded the boat and was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a loud explosion rang out from a distance. The volcano on the island finally erupted, and the scale of this eruption was clearly much larger than yesterday's. Tourists ran in fear. Marie's brother heard the noise and immediately went to the police station. He was thinking of ways to save his sister, who was arrested. Unexpectedly, the police had left the keys behind and fled. He quickly opened Marie's cell, and before leaving, they also freed the criminal next to her. Seeing the continuous eruption of lava, Marie was preparing to take her brother to the port when Frederick called her from the side of the road. He said there were no more boats at the port now. Earlier, Frederick had barely managed to get onto the yacht. Finally, when they were about to depart, suddenly, someone walked up to the shore. A mother with a child, but there was no space left on the boat. Frederick decided to give up his chance to live for others, and thought maybe good people would be rewarded. Marie's brother suddenly spoke up. He said he saw a boat hidden on the beach. So, everyone rushed to the beach behind the volcano. Indeed, there was a speedboat here. But as soon as they untied the ropes, a gunshot rang out from behind. It turned out that the person was the criminal Marie had freed earlier. He told Marie and her group to give up the boat, because some of his comrades needed it. Marie's brother refused to comply. He charged forward, ready to grab the gun. But the result was that he was shot in the stomach and fell to the ground. Frederick, for his family, also risked his life, using all his strength to wrestle with the criminal. When he was being held underwater by the criminal, he picked up a stone and slammed it into his forehead, and finally took care of the opponent. A few of his comrades also arrived. Frederick could only forcefully pull Marie, who was in pain, up. He used a pistol to drive off some of the pursuers. Marie, now regaining some of her senses, quickly started the speedboat and headed out to sea. At that moment, Frederick's wife and child had already reached the neighboring island. They were lucky to catch the last flight. When it was time to board the plane, Sarah, the daughter, happened to spot her best friend stranded at the airport. She let her mother take her younger brother on the plane first, and she quickly ran over to give her boarding pass to her best friend. In the end, the two best friends managed to board the plane. But unexpectedly, the mother didn't see her daughter for a long time and hadn't boarded yet. She even ran off the plane to search for her. As a result, they completely missed each other. Meanwhile, the director was still sadly sitting in his office. He thought all the staff had left. But he happened to meet someone. It was Hauker. He had been injured and unconscious in the previous accident, until the volcano eruption alarm woke him up. By then, it was too late to escape, so he could only return to the geological office. The director and Hauker could only look at each other and smile. The two of them, wearing protective gear, walked to the volcano's mouth and looked at the flowing lava. The director's face was filled with regret. If he had been more decisive back then, perhaps many people wouldn't have faced such a disaster. Hauker took a bottle of wine from his bag, and cheerfully prepared to welcome death. But just as he raised his glass, a strong tremor suddenly occurred. As the cracks quickly widened, half of the mountain slid to the bottom of the sea. A giant wave was forming. Meanwhile, Frederick and Marie had just set foot on the neighboring island. Suddenly, they heard a rumbling noise from afar. Immediately after, a shockwave hit them. Marie quickly took out binoculars to see. She discovered that the tsunami she feared the most had arrived. The giant cruise ship, in everyone's eyes, was just like a leaf before the power of nature. When the two were in despair, their phone suddenly received a message. It included coordinates, indicating it was the only safe place. It turned out that just a few minutes ago, a sea wave expert had calculated based on data that the tsunami caused by the La Palma volcano was terrifying. But the special shape of the neighboring island could withstand part of its power, creating a small safe zone behind it, where residents on the island could take shelter. Frederick's brother-in-law immediately decided to send the coordinates to everyone's phones. Frederick discovered that the shelter wasn't far away, so he pulled Marie and ran once more. But the giant waves could already be seen with the naked eye. The sweat on their foreheads was pouring down. They were now racing against time with death itself. At this moment, the people trapped at the airport, including Direx's wife, also received the message. She wanted to call her daughter on the plane, but discovered her phone had suddenly lost signal. The pilot on the plane realized the giant waves were approaching. He could only push the power to the maximum, but he still underestimated the speed of the tsunami. The passengers couldn't scream for help in time. The huge waves engulfed the entire plane. Frederick's wife and child were lucky to meet kind staff at the airport. Everyone boarded vehicles and went to the safe area before the waves arrived. Meanwhile, Frederick and Marie were still racing against death. The towering waves, hundreds of feet high, were behind them, and the small boat was also about to smoke. The two of them, in despair, discovered another giant wave coming toward them. Luckily, not far ahead, there was a ravine, so Frederick quickly turned left into it. In the next moment, the two waves collided. The enormous energy dissipated as a result. The two of them couldn't believe what they were seeing, and felt the smallness of human beings before nature. Frederick hurried to the beach, and discovered that many survivors had gathered here. He continuously asked some people here and learned that the airport had been destroyed. Frederick was immersed in the grief of losing his loved ones. Who would have thought that at that very moment, he heard someone call his name? He turned around to look. To his surprise, his wife and child had also escaped the disaster. On the other side of the airport, Frederick's daughter woke up from a coma. She held her best friend's hand and walked out of the damaged cabin, totally shocked by the scene before her. Soon after, the rescue team arrived to help everyone, and Frederick's family miraculously reunited after the tsunami. That's the entire plot of the movie La Palma. Do you think this movie is good? Humans are so small in the face of the power of nature. But after everything, family love will triumph. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed it, please support me with a subscription. Goodbye, and see you again.